And quite frankly, when I kind of get close to this part of what I'm trying to describe, I begin to fear about the eyes glazing over, because I think so many Americans feel so distant that we've had the best democracy money can buy for so long that it really is hard to imagine something different. And so I just want to emphasize that right now we know how to do this. We know how to get money out and get ourselves into public decision making. Right now, I know it sounds like the ultimate oxymoron, but I really think we've ended up with what can only be called privately held government. And there is a way to get our democracy for us again, and it's working in 3 states. We don't have to invent the wheel here. In 3 states, and one of them is Maine, and I just want to tell you, it's called voluntary public financing. Some call it fair elections, some call it clean elections, but in Maine, listen to just one person's story. In the year 2000, Deb Simpson, my superhero, was a waitress and a single mom with a high school education. But her friends saw a lot of leadership in Deb, and they said, Deb, why don't you run for the state legislature? And she looked at them kind of like, what are you talking about? Because I don't have money, I don't have a name. And they said, no, Deb, you're not paying attention. We have clean elections in Maine. All you have to do is get $5 from 50 people and you can run. And she said, oh, I'm a waitress. Maybe I could do that. And she ran. She's been reelected 4 times. And she is now so esteemed by her colleagues that she served on the state Judiciary Committee, and so esteemed by her colleagues in other states that she was appointed to a commission, a national commission, to deal with nuclear waste. That's how much this diner waitress has traveled, because she had the opportunity, because she was able to run without being dependent on corporate funds. And the state of Maine then was able, because 80% of the people in Maine who were in the legislature have run without corporate money, they were able to pass the first producer responsibility law in this country. The first producer responsibility law in electronics that required electronics corporations to be responsible for the full life cycle of what they produce. And that, in a couple years, has kept 1 pound of lead for every resident in Maine out of the waste stream. And this is a law that was fought like crazy by every electronics company except Hewlett-Packard, because they do have a recycling capacity. It was fought by corporations, but it was passed because the legislature could listen to what the people wanted. So right now, in Congress, House and Senate, there is a law, there is a bill, Fair Elections Now Act, Fair Elections Now Act. In the House, it has bipartisan support. It has over 100 co-sponsors, and it will establish for Congress the same approach that you, if you want to run for Congress, you get a certain number of contributors up to and no more than $100, and you prove yourself viable, and then you can only raise money from individuals up to $100, but then you get 4-fold that from public funds, so that you do not have to depend on corporations. So I'm suggesting then that all of these dimensions are what it will take to move us from the spiral of powerlessness to a spiral of empowerment, moving away from the conditions that we know now, that history shows, anthropology, even lab experiments on us show to bring out the worst in us, to those of dispersed power, of real community, not anonymity, but real community, and mutual accountability instead of the blame game. And that these are all ways, all tastes of this global growing up as a species that I think is possible. But I will close with just one more piece to this message, because I do think there's another critical piece, and that has to do with something very, very personal, even more personal than what I've talked about, and with our evolutionary heritage. Because you're not going to be surprised now when I say I think we're good enough, we're plenty good enough. But there is something still kind of missing in our basic construct, but we can do something about it. And that something missing comes down from this, that we evolved in such tightly knit tribes. We were so bound to one another that the scariest thing of all is breaking with the pack, breaking with the tribe. But here we are, 2010, and the whole tribe is heading over Victoria Falls. So breaking from the pack has a whole different meaning in the 21st century. Instead of death, it means life. Breaking with the pack is life. But we're still hardwired. And so breaking with the pack can still bring up fear. Can still bring up fear. So part of the reframe, and fear, I'm convinced also, is in part an idea. We have the idea about fear that it means we have only 3 responses, right? Fight, flee, or fight. Freeze, right. Fight, fear. Freeze is the most common one, I think, actually. So we think those are the only responses. But I'm convinced that there's a bigger repertoire. And if we understand that fear is natural, if we are really stepping up to align ourselves and to align with all we know about how nature works, then we'll recognize that we will be experiencing fear. And we can reframe it, not as a verdict, as we thought it was, oh, you're in the wrong place, you're in the wrong time, get out of there, or freeze, so you won't be seen. But it may well be just information. When we feel, in my case, it's the pounding heart. It's definitely the pounding heart. And so, I have a cheesy trick when in the reframe category. So when I feel that, when I'm really on the edge, and I'm really scared, and I feel the pounding heart, I say, oh, it's just inner applause. And that's a whole lot better than it used to be, which is, you wimp. So I'm saying that if we're going to make this turn, we have to rethink fear. And so I call what's required is bold humility. That we got to get this boldness by reframing fear, by encouraging each other to take the risk that are going to bring up fear. And the bold humility, the humility piece is this. And this gets so much easier the older you get. I love getting old for this reason, among others. But one of them is that I realize that the things that most get me out of bed in the morning, like, for example, oh my goodness, when I was, well, let me just complete the sentence and I'll go back to that. The things that most get me up in the morning, I would never have given more than a 1% chance of success when I was, my children's age, or in my 20s, they're in their 30s now, but, when I was young. Think about it. Land reform in Brazil? Are you kidding? Every time there's been land reform, the peasants have been wiped out. And yet, Brazil has probably the largest social movement in our hemisphere that is creating a 1/3 people on 20 million acres of land, creating new organic farms and schools and businesses. Yeah, I wouldn't have given it much of a chance at all. Or what about the planting of billions of trees? No. And yet, listen to this. Are you aware that the UNEP, the environmental program, set a goal a few years ago of a global movement called Plant for the Planet? Are you aware of this? Plant for the Planet had the goal of, I believe it started out at 4 billion trees. And last year, they were so far ahead that they had to up the number to 7 billion trees. And then, before this trip, I went back back to the website, and there are now 10 billion trees that have been planted all over the globe through this Plant for the Planet movement that most of us had never heard about. I only heard about it because I was in Germany in a school where they were planting for the planet in Germany. So, it's not possible to know what's possible. That's the humility part. That's the humility part. And that is what, and I will just, on that note of it's not possible to know what's possible, I'll just end with one more story and then a very short part of a poem.